Well, thanks for coming through, everybody. This and the thanks to you all is a genuine too, because a couple of the things that we've been doing lately, these cohorts, a couple of kind of like the forum activities that have been happening, are really community activities. We have in here, who I'm going to introduce in just a second, a professional, high-powered individual in a particular discipline and field. That said, this is also going to be a creative process that we'll all share in too. So everybody that kind of has like dedicated themselves to, and also this is a little bit more of an invested process. And before we jump, I just want to kind of say there's been these conversations on the side talking about how exciting and beautiful some of these new processes are, and how a couple people in this room been in that talk with me personally about how, yeah, some of the best stuff comes out of us playing and making together. And so, yeah, there you go, Brittany. And so, yeah, we're gonna. I thought that was a gesture, like, yeah, that was me. That we did have that conversation on the side, but yeah. So we're gonna mess around and make some stuff together through the process. So yeah, thank you all for coming and bringing what you're about to bring into that process with this group of people. It's gonna be dynamic. That said, I'm gonna pass it over to Joey in a second to introduce the process and maybe tell a little bit more about himself. But I'll just say that when it was Barry that introduced us, right, Joey?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Man, our boy Barry in Ireland has been bringing out some of the craziest people, and Joey's was one of the ones we got the most hype about. And like I was just saying to him before we start, probably everybody in this room that has kids coming through has some kind of interaction with some sneakers or some design. There's some people that even keep stacks of blank coloring pages of shoes for kids that are unengaged, because almost every single time and point, a kid sitting down and putting a personal touch on a pair of Jordan 1s, even on paper, has such an effect and impact. And so, yeah, in that aspect of following the youth's interests and things that are exciting and new for us and involving technology and personalization and design, we're super hyped to jump into this process. That said, Joey, I know a lot of folks weren't on the other one. Some people might have been and saw the intro. I'm sure you're probably gonna touch on a little bit about your background and experience. But yeah, if it's cool, I'll let you do that and pass it off to you so I don't mess that up.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'll go into a little bit of the background of how I got into footwear design and how you can get into footwear design. But yeah, just an intro. Hey everyone, I'm Joey. I'm a footwear designer. I'm currently a freelance footwear designer. I have experience working at Columbia Sportswear, Reebok. I did some stuff for Yeezy, and then a bunch of other different brands from clients that I've gotten from just my own my freelance business. That's Canvas Studio, and then and then that's kind of also turning into its own brand where I've put out some of my own footwear. That's because of the ability to put out footwear is getting easier with 3D printing, that'll kind of come up throughout these sessions throughout the next weeks. But yeah, if you want me to go ahead, I can just get started on the presentation. Cool.
Sure.
All right, awesome. So I will share my screen real quick. And then if you can see, then we're good to go. I'll get started.
Good to go.
Cool. Awesome. So going to be just kind of giving you guys a background of footwear design, what footwear design is, and then a deeper dive into like the footwear design process that'll give you all like context for the rest of the days and how, VR and Gravity Sketch will be involved in this process. I think it'll be good to get these foundational things in mind. So you're not just going into VR thinking that's the way shoes are all being designed, and there's so much more to it. Um, so I'm going to talk about industrial design really quick. Industrial design is the process of design applied to products to be manufactured. That's like the actual like definition of what industrial design is. Another word for it is product design. So I mean, if you really just think about it, it's just anything that's been designed to be mass produced and sold. So, I mean, any product you can think of, the furniture in your house, the your toothbrush, the electronics, cars, all the I mean, anything, just any product you've used has been probably designed by an industrial designer or a data or mix of engineers and such, because there is some overlap when it gets into that. So industrial designer uses like sketching, making mock-ups, making prototypes, all that to communicate your ideas. Because you can have the ideas, you can sketch the ideas, but being able to communicate them to be able to be made, or communicate them to express an idea to a consumer or someone, other people that you work with, marketing, engineering, all that stuff, just to figure out how to get it made in the best way possible, is kind of what you're doing. And it's a lot of it is solving problems with design. That's so many of the things that you use in your everyday are have solved a problem that has come up at some point. You might not even realize it's solving a problem because it does its job so well that it's just it's just there. I mean, if you think about just like furniture, like a table and chairs, that's it's just something that's there and you don't even recognize that it's designed or it was designed that way, but it's doing a lot of things. It serves a lot of purposes. And then so that gives the context to footwear design, because footwear design, shoes are just another product. So it's kind of its own lane within industrial design, just because it expands into so many different categories and can even kind of blend into, outside of design and more into fashion and art when it gets, into certain categories of footwear. So getting into footwear, like I said, I studied industrial design, and then I also took some footwear design courses at the time was a small school in Portland called the Pencil Footwear Design Academy, which is now the Pencil Lewis College. It's based in Detroit. So you could study industrial design and go down that route. You could go to an art or fashion college or university. And then, like I said, you could now we have things like the Pencil Lewis College, which is a footwear design school, and I think it even expands into, apparel and all the roles at a company that kind of surround, footwear. Like any position you would imagine that would exist at like a Nike or something, all those can kind of be learned around footwear and footwear design. And then another way to get that you could get into footwear design is that's something you could, start doing, tomorrow, even today after this, is practice sketching. That's one of the biggest things, like the fundamentals that you learn as a designer of any sort, of just being able to learn the fundamentals of sketching your ideas to be able to communicate them clearly and quickly, for, different people. Sometimes you have an idea that you can sketch and it looks cool and you know really expressive sketch, and your other designer friends and like colleagues can recognize that and see that, but communicating to a factory or to marketing or whatever, it requires different types of ways to show these things. And then footwear design careers is like, I wanted to kind of outline a few different like paths that you could go down. You could, obviously go and try to work for a company like Nike, Adidas, or New Balance, one of those big sportswear companies. Or that could, the ones that are still big but kind of smaller in that same lane, like like a Brooks or Asics or Saucony type of brand. Um, Another route is the freelance route and working for multiple brands as clients. That's something that I do. I'm able to work with several different brands in different categories of footwear, um, which is kind of cool because you're not limited to just one. When you're working at something like a New Balance or Adidas, you get kind of put into uh, not only just obviously that brand, but a category within that. And um, if that's something that it aligns with your interest and skill set, that's great. But if you want to branch out to different types of footwear, the like more independent route could make more sense that way. And then another like lane that you could go down is working at a smaller like footwear design studio. A lot of these like kind of exist from former designers that have worked for years, and they've started their own small studio where they have other designers, and they kind of have their own clients that are other brands. And the interesting about these types of places is you can get a lot more hands-on because you're involved in more steps of the process. You're not this one piece of a giant machine. You're kind of you're wearing, the phrase like wearing multiple hats. You're not just doing design, probably doing a lot of development, a lot of maybe even the marketing and storytelling behind the shoes. Um, and anything beyond that, a lot of the prototyping, making samples and mock-ups in-house type of deal. So what else could you do with ID industrial design? It is product design. So like I said, you could design anything. I have, the sketches, you go down designing cars, furniture, electronics, all sorts of things. Um, and many industrial designers also work at consultancies where their clients, they're with multiple clients from different brands and different products. So this is like a route where you could, uh, if you like design, but you're not particularly tied down to wanting to do furniture or wanting to do footwear, you have this opportunity to work somewhere where, your clients, you can be working across different brands, but not only that, like one day you're working on a furniture product, the next week, you're working on, I don't know, designing like yard equipment, like, lawnmowers or something. And it can be really anything. Uh, or even like Tupperware, like all that stuff is being designed at these types of places by these types of people. And, maybe you could do that while trying to find out what your true interest and skills are at. And all of this to say, it's, once you get the design brief and you have the problem you're trying to solve and the product you need to make, all of this is just going from an idea to a final product. And that those ideas usually start with some sort of sketching. And then the final product is, a sample from a factory before it's going to market. So in the next like days, we'll kind of go deeper dive into this project in particular and showing how VR gets into this footwear design process that I'm about to go through. So yeah, so the footwear design process starts with a design brief, which is a document that outlines the objective for the footwear, like who's going to be wearing this shoe, how will they be using it, when will they wear it, what's the price point, many other things, dependent on the project. If the brief is to design, the signature shoe for a basketball player, you're trying to tap into like who's that audience, like what's the story the brief's going to define like the story that's trying to be told, that the expression of that player, but also, this needs to hit certain functional things of like has to be able to perform well, has to be a high quality, shoe, has to hit, it's probably going to hit a higher price point because of that. When is it going to be worn? It's probably an in-game thing, but is it also something, is the brief asking for a shoe that's performance but also sits in the more casual lifestyle way? And so as the designer, you're figuring out all those things to be able to design something that, in that case, is wearable on the court, but also could be worn off the court if that's what that brief is asking for. A brief is given to a designer, usually by a project manager, and it's often based off of market research, trends, or some sort of opportunity to compete with another brand or some sort of opportunity that's not being met currently. Nowadays, there's so many brands and so many sneakers that it seems like there's something for everyone. But sometimes there's like little openings in that come into the market where, a project manager might notice like, oh, there's, this person's like, they're gonna, they like wearing this shoe, but there's also someone that likes this shoe if we add a bit more color to it. It can be as simple as brief as that. And that's where those kind of opportunities come in, where the designer tries to tap into that like consumer group and give them something that they would want to wear. And then, so before I dive any more into the footwear design process, um, just wanted to kind of go over the shoe last, because that is like the foundation of footwear design. Everything that the shoe is going to be based around that, and that is going to like dictate the form. The last is the form that the shoemaker is using for shoe molding. When the upper is created, it's wrapped around that shoe last. So that's going to dictate the shape. If it's a running shoe, it might have a little bit more or less of a heel lift to it, or the last might be taller because it's for a high top shoe or a boot, and you need different shapes as it goes up. So it's like the whole phrase is like the last comes first, because it's like the most important like foundational thing of design. Um, what it is, it's essentially a generalized form of a foot that's going to inform the shape of the shoe. And there's thousands and thousands of different types of these lasts for all sorts of different types and styles of footwear and sizes. Like for example, like when an an athlete gets like a signature sneaker, there's usually a last custom created, just based on their actual measurements and size like that. So okay, back into the design process. So problem solving, the designer's job is to solve a problem, and sometimes it's designing a shoe to help a runner be faster. It's helping a basketball player cut quicker on the court. It could be even a shoe that's designed to solve, protect a construction worker from injury. All these, those like problems that kind of exist again that you might not even notice throughout the day is things that designers address for different reasons. Like the construction workers having a steel toe boot, like at some point someone designed that because there was a problem, and they came to the solution of that as being to solve that issue. And the problem is usually something that's defined in the design brief, and it could be as direct as creating a safer footwear for construction workers, or just making this running shoe just like it needs to be faster, or it needs to be lighter weight. We need to figure out how to do that. But the problem can also just be as, like I said, as simple as tapping into a different consumer group that your brand might not be tapping into, and that's by what style, like what style can you make a version of your current sneaker and tap into that audience. So yeah, all that to say is, your ideas to solve these problems in the ideation phase that we're about to go into, those will be tested when you create prototypes and mockups. So you've got the problem or the brief, you've addressed the problem. Now you have ideas, and those ideas will need to get tested. Here's an example of just like a screen grab of a project that I did when I was at Reebok. It was just a concept project that I was working on the side, but it was like the idea of creating a trail running shoe that was a bit more protective from like hazardous, like this more niche group of runners that were running in really hazardous areas. And so that was the problem, and my solution was this outsole rubber piece that kind of wrapped up the shoe, added extra protective layers, but also figured out a way to give it some other use and make it part of the lacing system. So it's, we're not just adding extra material for no reason. And you can even remove other, material, because now you don't need an extra piece for the lace loops in the lacing system. It's kind of an all-in-one thing. So that's just an example of that, problem solution type of mindset as a designer. So some of the ideation phase comes at this point, and this is where designers, start brainstorming all their ideas, writing things down, sketching ideas, really like loose, rough sketches. Sometimes doesn't look good, it doesn't look pretty, but it's getting the idea out, exploring different materials that could be used for the project, exploring different shapes and forms, and all this just to visualize ideas, using creating a mood board, finding inspiration, and basically just gathering all this stuff together as a starting point, that's going to influence the design of the shoe, aesthetically, functionally, materialistically, like all that kind of stuff. And then so this image on the right is some ideation that I did on a project at Reebok, a classic leather sneaker. So you can kind of see it's just like a big collection of like kind of expressive loose sketches of sneakers exploring different shapes, different proportions, different like layerings and constructions of like how the materials go together. Different, I mean, even as simple as like exploring different like little heel tabs instead of just having a little loop, maybe it's made out of a piece of plastic or a little rope or something, just little things like that. And uh, using these sketches to explore where, how color comes in. Is it going to be like just a solid monotone color shoe, or are you going to use the color to highlight things like the outsole and make that the highlight of the shoe? That something like that is um, used in like a lot of like, for example, uh, like a Nike shoe or something. Like whenever there's like the new technology comes out, they usually use color to highlight that technology so it stands out. It's like the focal point of the thing. So you even like just the color design and where colors are going is something that is part of this ideation phase. To tell the story of the shoe and make it look good and also highlight the functions of it. Mockups and prototyping. So um, mockups are kind of like the next level of visualizing your ideas. You can take some of those sketches and visualize them three-dimensionally. And, they can be made of scraps, cardboard, paper, or just cut up pieces of old shoes. That's usually kind of what happens at at like a design studio. There's just endless boxes of old samples of sneakers. You cut them up and make samples. Old scrap material you can piece together, glue it together, whatever, just to get your idea communicated or work out a certain function that you're doing. But this is definitely like the messy part of design. It doesn't have to look good. It just has to, um, you're just trying to figure out how it's gonna work and how it's gonna be put together. And I'm kind of gonna make this image bigger. Yeah. So this is just an example of that. This was an idea that I was working on of like this recovery shoe. Kind of the next, like a little bit leveled up from a slide instead of just having a foam slide as a post game or post race recovery shoe. Um, but just kind of like making the shoe, cutting the front the back half off, having it still be kind of like a sneaker but slip on so it's loose. It's holding you secure and comfortable. But the whole idea of this was this heel piece that was kind of on a hinge but tied down with the strap that could be adjusted, pulled back to be like loosened up and be casual like a slide, or pull it in and make it more like a sneaker. So all that to say the images in the top right corner is kind of my mock-up execution of that. It was just I just pulled a random shoe, I cut the back half off of it, created this little heel piece, and just cut and glued everything together and made this little contraption to test the idea out. It looked horrible. It was messy. It was just cut up pieces of fabric and glue it all together. But it helped me get the idea across and test out to see if it worked. Another important part of the design process is taping up and pattern making. So taping up a last, as I mentioned, the shape that's going to be dictating or informing the shape of what the shoe is going to look like. And so taping up a last to draw your design helps to visualize the idea as it will look in the natural shape of the shoe as opposed to just a sketch. And if you tape up a last properly and sketch on it, it can be used to create flat patterns to create, the pieces of the shoe where you could even make your own mock-up or prototype. Um, and yeah, so like with that, you can create a shell pattern that you could, give to the factory to company technical drawings that you would also be giving them. And like I said, if you have the materials and sewing machine on hand, which you most likely would, working for a sneaker brand, you can create your mock-ups and patterns in-house, or have them created in-house, saving some steps in the sampling process, because you basically have the rough idea of where's the toe cap going, how high is the tongue going to get it come up, and work out the construction of the shoe before handing things off to the factory. This is a process that's been used for years and years, and like most footwear designers know how to do it or use it all often, if not occasionally. Great way to get create patterns going to the factory, like I said. And nowadays there's digital versions of this where you have on your computer you have like a 3D last file, and you can sketch on it, and it would kind of generate those flat patterns for you. It's kind of doing the the cutting and laying flat of those pattern pieces for you digitally. Um, and that's how you can create like all these shell pattern pieces. As you can see in this image, it's done where you just cut the tape off and you have your parts laid out flat how they would be created um, from the factory. So the next step would be, once you have your design and all that, is working with the factory. Once you have your idea, you need to work with the factory to bring that idea to life and figure out how to mass produce it. And that's where the industrial design background comes in, because you can design a shoe and it's a crazy concept and it looks cool and it could be made, but it's not able to be made at mass production or cheap or affordable. So that's where those skills also come in, to make sure you're creating designs but making sure they can get made at a reasonable cost. And so when you're working with the factory, you need to create an organized document with all the technical drawings of the shoe, which I'll get into next. Anything you put in these drawings will be made, so it needs to be precise and accurate. If you give them, vague drawings that aren't too detailed, or it's kind of loose and not specified measurements and things like that, you're not sure what you're going to get back, because the factory is going to have to assume a lot of things or take guesses on stuff, and that's going to run into problems of more more rounds of sampling and a lot more issues. So just creating a good tech drawing from the beginning is a foundational thing. And yeah, so the designer isn't the one that's like solely responsible for making sure everything's good to go, and making sure everything's going to be able to be made, and the factory is going to have to assume that. There's a lot of back and forth before the sampling phase. A designer usually is like working alongside a developer, which is someone who's kind of the engineering side of things. They understand footwear construction, best practices, how materials are going to react to each other, how they're going to feel comfort wise. Like, they can tell you certain things of like, this material should overlay this one instead because it's going to be more comfortable. They know all those sorts of things. So you're not going in there completely blind, and the factory have to correct you on things, because you kind of have that person guiding you. The developer is kind of the person guiding you through the factory process. And this is an example of or part of an example of a tech pack from that same shoe earlier that I showed from the ideation phase. So at this point, your design's been approved. You're ready to get a sample and you're ready to hand it off to the factory. You need to create a tech pack, and a tech pack can be a pretty tedious process and require a lot of detail. But like I was saying, the more detailed and precise you are here, the less you have to fix later. So now you can see, compared to those sketches that I showed earlier, it's a little bit more, it's more tight, it's more controlled, it's cleaner, it's precise. Like, you have all the, down to the details of even where the stitching is, how many lines is it double stitch, single stitch, is it, all these details, and talking about the, call outs for the construction of the shoe, how it's made, what are the materials, what does it look like from the top to the bottom, the front, the back. So the factory has everything that they need to know. And so one of the things that where VR and Gravity Sketch is going to come into play here is not necessarily replacing the tech pack, but coming in to assist with the tech pack. One of the things with when you have a new sole design, it requires blueprint drawings and technical drawings with really precise measurements and things like that. And that's something you learn how to do and get used to. But if you come to the factory instead with a 3D model, that kind of changes the game there, because now they have exactly what you want. Like, you've designed this thing, you've modeled it, they know exactly what it looks like, and they have the measurements and everything, as opposed to sending them drawings and they're kind of making some assumptions and guesses, which the first samples never come back as you expected, because of those miscommunications that happen and misinterpretations that happen. So another part of a tech pack is like a material map. So this was just from a basketball shoe concept that I was working on. but this is like an example of that. Like it's the drawing, but it's not necessarily what it's actually going to look like necessarily color wise. But it's just a map that's calling out materials. So you create this like this key on the left where it says like you know, you label the part, what's the material, if it's constructed in a certain way, um, and all that. So you know, right now this tech pack is kind of vague because it wasn't it was a concept project, so I wasn't working with the factory on this. But normally you'd have like, you know, a specific material code and like a specific um, you know, supplier of the material. So that, you know, you can't just say like use an open mesh for the upper of the shoe. The factory has thousands of different options for that. So that, you know, you have to, that's where you, this is the part where you specify those things and get the results that you know, were expecting to get out of them. And then so this is like the actual, like this would be like the main page of that tech pack for that shoe. It's the drawing of what you want the shoe to look like. You would have, you know, multiple pages of this for different colorways, but like the usually you'd send off the colorway you would want to get sampled initially. Um, so this is basically just again the drawing, uh, showing it what it's going to look like, the proportions, proper proportions, uh, any material callouts, any weird construction callouts. You can even, you know, pull parts aside and go give a bit more specifications. Like I have the tongue here on the left, you know, because you're not going to get exactly what that's going to look like from these side views or even a top view with the laces getting involved. So you kind of can pull that to the side and show what the flat pattern of that piece would look like. Um, let me go, I think the next one. Yeah, so back to the blueprint, and this is where the next couple or next few sessions will get really involved, where how Gravity Sketch helps out here, because this is something that as a when you have a new sole design, you have to create these types of drawings, and it looks like super intimidating, and it's a very, you know, tedious process where you're calling out the tiniest little measurements of every little piece, every single little, you know, ridge on the sole of the outsole, even what the inside looks like. Is there little cutouts? Is there holes? Is there, you know, what's if there's an airbag in it? There you have to call that out and like design that little pocket for it and where it sits and all that. So there's all these little details that have to be created, and you know, the factory assists you in creating this like document that looks uh super clean and cut. You know, the designer's usually just doing the drawing portion of it. Um, but all that to say, it's like it's such a again like a tedious process. You're sending drawings that a factory is just going to take it one for one and create a 3D model. And there's something that can get lost in translation, like uh, you know, you have all the at the bottom, you can see there's like these section views, and those correlate with the four, like those like five lines that are cutting across here. So like if you look at like B to B1, this line is showing B to B1 down here. So that's like a section view of what that looks like if, you know, if the shoe's cut there. But there's all this space in between them, in between these lines, and there's space for misinterpretation. Um, and that's usually where, you know, the first sample doesn't come back exactly how you want it. And then so the where Gravity Sketch and VR come in, it's because so most 3D modeling softwares are, they have a quite a bit of a learning curve to understand and get really good at it. They're a lot more geared toward like engineering type brain and engineers that are, you know, they kind of understand that the super like engineering side and the math and the technical side of what it takes to model. But Gravity Sketch and VR, because of the way you work through that like workflow, it's geared towards designers. It's more intuitive. It's it kind of feels like sculpting in a way, and there's just more hands-on as opposed to, you know, even using like algorithms to model things. It's more of by feel and instinct and designing that way. So it kind of fits the designer's workflow a little bit better. And so where that lines up as like a really valuable skill as a designer, as a footwear designer, is now the footwear designer is able to do part of it, add this skill set to their add to their skill set of 3D modeling, and almost kind of tapping into the job of like a developer or someone that's a specializer in 3D modeling. That's something that I had always tried to learn 3D modeling as to bring my ideas to life and create digital assets so I could render 3D render and visualize my ideas that way. I just couldn't learn. I just didn't have the brain to learn and work in that type of way. And then Gravity Sketch came along, and it really just kind of gave it came naturally to work this way. And now 3D is such a big part of my footwear design process because it saves me, it saves time, it saves resources, because I can start getting a clear idea three-dimensionally of what my shoe's going to look like, before even making physical samples that will most likely have to either be, tossed or unsellable because they're sample products. Yeah, so um, the shoe that I did, I have it right here. That we're gonna kind of go into more of the process, this same footwear design process, but where VR comes in. That's what this shoe was about. This is a shoe that I designed with Gravity Sketch. I teamed up with the actual the software company to basically take this footwear design process that I just kind of ran you guys through and apply and use Gravity Sketch at every step of the way. So normally it's not a recommended thing to like take the entire design process using Gravity Sketch, but we did that just to see where we could find value in it in the process. So I'm going to be using that shoe, that the process of making that shoe, to explain where you could be using Gravity Sketch and virtual reality in the design process. And one of those main things is that we found is the communication with the factory with 3D models, as opposed to doing the traditional blueprint route. And we saved a lot of time. I mean, this is technically the second sample, but it's, in terms of the sole, it's the exact same as the first sample. And the fact that we kind of got the first sample back and it was pretty much exactly how we needed it, with this, you know, exception of a few really, really small changes, that was kind of unheard of in that process, to be able to get something that fast back. And so these sessions that we'll be doing will be showing that modeling process and how you can communicate your ideas from a sketch to a model that can give you a more realistic idea of how your design is going to look like. So sampling. So this is sampling is like the first time that you're seeing your idea as close to the final product as you'll see it before going to market. This is typically created by the factory, although you can do stuff like this in-house. Like Nike definitely has the resources and probably like a sampling room where they can send drawings downstairs and they get them made and they have a sample the next day. But typically it's done with the factory, so you're using the proper materials and construction methods and all that kind of stuff. So unlike a mock-up, the sample is using the proper materials and the construction techniques, all the same as you would, as the factory would for the final product. And this is where you start evaluating your design and making any kind of final changes. Usually a few rounds of sampling. This is like an example of like a first sample. It's sometimes called a pullover at this point, because it's not exactly what it's going to look like. The materials are kind of scrap materials. The color doesn't matter. Things are they kind of look unfinished and not like polished up exactly. But it's like the first sample, the pullover, where you're just trying to knock out like the big picture kind of things, and then also then tap into little details that you want to see better on the next samples. So you can see like on this one at the bottom, I kind of called out this tiny detail of the stitching going over the embroidery and circling that, and there would be a more formal document of making these call outs and clearly explaining those like revisions that we'd send back to the factory. But yeah, essentially, like, this is like the first thing that you would be getting. This is a shoe that that I did at Reebok that ended up going to the market. But so like the next sample would be the proper colors, the materials would be exactly how you specified. They take into account any revisions, and then usually maybe one or two more samples to get the final product, and then ideally your the final sample should look exactly like what the product's going to go to market. You wouldn't want to make any more changes at that point because you wouldn't know what it's going to turn out to be like. An example of making those sample revisions, there's different ways that you can do it. This is an example that from that Reebok Classic shoe that I got to help work on. We just, sometimes it's easier to just take a photo of the shoe and draw the revisions on there, like with these red lines that you see. There's, literally just redrawing the lines, and the factory can get a clear idea of what you want fixed, what you want changed, adjusted, just making these small little tweaks here and there. But at this phase, other than the actual design of the shoe, this is where you're making adjustments to test out different colorways or get samples of different materials so you can see which one you want to go with. If you have, a few different suede materials you want to try out, for example, make edits to measurements and just addressing any areas if there's, if it's uncomfortable, or if there's little things that are poking at your feet awkwardly that you need to make a change. Another example of those revisions down there is what I mentioned earlier is a shell pattern, and it's basically the flat drawing of what the upper looks like when the materials are cut out, laid out flat, and stitched together before it's before it's fully stitched together and molded around the last shape. So the factory would give you this shell pattern, and it would be one-to-one reference from the sample that's above. Well, these are from two different shoes, but it was just as an example. But the shell pattern would be a one-to-one pattern that is used for the sample that you have on hand, so you can make any adjustments there and then translate that to the shell pattern, make those revisions, and then that's where the factory would execute those revisions, and your next sample would be tuned to that. Okay, so that was the traditional footwear design process, and this is going into 3D printed footwear design. This is the image there is a shoe that I designed with this company called Zellerfeld, and they're kind of one of a few 3D printing companies that make ready to go to market footwear that's 3D printed. So the 3D printing process is a slightly different process than the traditional way. Pretty much everything up until the point of working with the factory, it's the same, but after, the factories are so different, there's typically just one material, there's different methods of how it's made. So that's where the process kind of changes. Yeah, like I said, since it's a single piece material that's printed, there is not, there's material maps, there's no patterns to be created. You're probably not doing taping up a last and creating patterns like that, because it's all just one piece that's 3D modeled and then printed. So that's where this kind of discovered this way of working where you could send the 3D to a factory to create a sole for a traditional sneaker, but in this way you're creating a 3D file that is the entire sneaker. And so with 3D printing, it has its different like limitations to look out for and design around. Unlike the traditional sneakers, there's a lot of limitations of how how detailed or different shapes and forms you can make because of the complexity that with molds and all that kind of stuff, and the limits of customization because you're using molds again. But with 3D printing, although it has its own limitations, it has a lot less limitations with how it can be made and the different shapes you can print in and the structure that you can make internally. So there's different just saying that to say it's like a slightly different design process when it comes to like the technical side of being a footwear designer. Because there's less, there's no tech pack. It's more of just, here we're gonna 3D model this idea, send it to the manufacturer, and they can print it. And so that's where VR and Gravity Sketch can come in really big, and I think could be applied to even when you're designing shoes like foam slides or like a Yeezy Runner type of shoe or Crocs, where it's like Crocs are still a couple pieces with the strap and all that, but it's essentially like a one piece foam thing. That's where 3D modeling with VR works for the designer's mind and for the product result. And then one last thing about 3D printed footwear that's interesting is because there's no molds, there's more customization. So, that shoe last is that generalized foot shape, and it's still important to use for, most people that are going to fit that. But because there's no molds and 3D printed shoes can be kind of adjusted per pair, there's the ability to make slight measurement adjustments to that like last shape that you're referencing and, make it wider or make it a little bit longer for different people. And then, yeah, so that's the footwear design process, a brief overview of it. That process, I guess, just to give a little bit more context, can take up to, if it's an entirely new shoe or like an innovation, it takes longer. So anywhere from, you know, 8 to 18 months to get to market type of deal. But yeah, so that's the process. And then the next sessions I'm going to be going over using where Gravity Sketch fits into this footwear design process. And there's a ton of value to be had using VR, in my opinion, and from my experience. So yeah, that's what we'll be covering the next couple times. And then I did leave. I think we have some extra time if there's any questions or anything like that. And then yeah, so next week, yeah, Gravity Sketch. We'll go over the setup and the workflow. So that'll be the setup for next time. So I'll stop sharing, and if there's any questions or discussion, anything you wanted to go over at this point, feel free. And thank you for your time. I appreciate
All right, y'all got all that?
it.
Yeah, yeah, that one took a little
Yeah,
extra
I mean,
time.
I know it sounds like so much information and wouldn't expect anyone to fully know the footwear design process after that. And I did kind of go a little bit more in detail on certain things than I probably should have, but I think it was good to show really specific use cases of like my experience with like using 3D to help with a sole instead of, the that's why I kind of explained the really intricacies of a blueprint. Because I think that it just gives a lot of context to like how it's being done versus how it's starting to be done with VR, and give you guys some context in that way.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, yes, super in there. So yeah, knowing that this is kind of like this design process is going to feed out of our creative process when we get to making. Yeah, I just Joey set this time aside for us to all kind of like digest that together. So any questions or thoughts or anything you want to unmic for and bring up now, or throw in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat. And yeah, I'm just gonna sit back for a second and let you all come in. Questions, thoughts?
Well,
Basically,
I love this
okay.
kind of stuff. I'm a big I have a design background myself as well. So going over the design process, I have no problems with that whatsoever. So thank you, Joey.
Yeah.
And understanding that from the shoe design standpoint, I think is also super important. I guess I'm curious how I feel like anytime that there's a new technology and there's new innovation and it kind of helps in one regard, it also opens up Pandora's box to other maybe unintended issues or consequences. What would you say have been some of those in that 3D space of now you're designing and maybe some of those traditional barriers aren't there, but now there are new barriers that you're coming across?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just as simple as like the factory is been doing something for, I mean, they've been making sneakers with some, changes here and there. They've
Mm,
been making sneakers the same way since like the 90s or 80s even. And so a lot of them haven't changed processes, and some of them are not open to accepting a 3D file instead of a tech pack. I think I think slowly they are now because it just helps in that process. But like one of the things like I guess the factory that we worked with on that shoe I showed, they were open to even jumping into virtual reality and doing the revisions live on the 3D model, which was pretty unheard of that they even had headsets ready to go for that.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things like that's I think a rare case. Maybe in the next 5 or so years there'll be more factories getting onto that, but that's one of
Mm.
the things is like just trying to because there's so many systems set up in place with the traditional way that sometimes when you come in with a new way that might be better, they still
Mm.
might not be ready to work that way.
Mm. Nice. Thanks. Yeah, Alana has a question in the chat, but Macy, you had your hand up. I know. Do you want to? And then I'll relay Alana's question after that.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask really quick, and I'm sorry if you already said this and I missed it. What like design software did you use to create your blueprints?
So yeah, I mean that was really just done in Adobe Illustrator. That's yeah, actually I should have mentioned that with like the tech packs and all that. Yeah, I mean Illustrator is one of those things where you pretty much need to know how to use it as I think as a designer in general, but as a footwear designer specifically, because like kind of going back to the last question, a lot of these brands have systems in place, and Adobe Illustrator is typically the thing that you have to use to create your tech packs because they have a very specific way of submitting them and even how the files are read by the factory and all that. But yeah, even the blueprint usually done in Illustrator as well. And sometimes it's that it's like the blueprint, like looking at it, it looks so like intimidating. There's all these like uh, just so many like section views and cutouts and measurements and stuff. But usually if you send a good technical drawing of the orthograph, like the side view, top view, all that, the factory usually assists in giving you the foundation of that blueprint, and then you can make the adjustments in Illustrator.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, Macy. That was
Yeah,
one of
good
the
one.
thing too. And just out of curiosity, is anybody in here a little intimidated by Illustrator for functions like this? Yeah, yeah, it is. I think I think there's a lot. That's a common piece of like even people that are like really functional in Photoshop and then moving into kind of like that vector shape based space. That's a good one for us to note, and maybe we could find some space to touch that a little bit through our process.
Yeah, and like yeah, because even that's one of those things where I didn't even realize how many 3D things you can do in Illustrator. There's so much I don't even know about Illustrator or Photoshop too. So, um, yeah, I mean it's kind of basic what you need to know in Illustrator for this because it's a lot of just pen tool and drawing and just yeah, just kind of drawing in there and not doing anything too complex. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things where even going into my first job, I was like asking every other second, probably annoying my mentors how to do things, but
Hmm.
that's
Yep.
just how it
Yeah.
goes.
Yep. And maybe just before we drop that, is there anybody that feels highly proficient in Illustrator in the room? Okay. All right.
I
No,
mean,
good.
I
Yeah.
wouldn't say highly proficient, but like I think once I get in there, I can, you know, tread water, I'll say.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, depending on thank you. Yeah, that's good to know because that essentially was a volunteer and Brittany, yeah, because another one of the good things that come out of these cohorts and groups is identifying those and yeah, we may lean to each other going forward. And I'm also noting that down too. Something for us to dig into even in other contexts outside of this group. Um, do you before and then Alana's, but just the last question about that Illustrator. Do you use Illustrator on the iPad for a lot of what you're using, or are you mostly like
For
desktop
Illustrator,
phone?
I've done desktop for Illustrator, but a lot of my like sketch, like the loose sketching and all that type of stuff. If I'm not doing it on paper, I'm doing it on an iPad. Like, uh, there's like Sketchbook Pro or like Procreate, either one of those things. I use Procreate. But yeah, so that's where like the looser sketching is. I've never actually used Illustrator on the iPad, but
Hmm,
I,
nice.
if you can do it that way, it works. So yeah.
Uh-huh. And Sketchbook Pro is free too, right?
I think so. I haven't used it
Yeah,
for
I
a
think it's
while,
like
but yeah.
$10. Nice. Thanks, man. And Alana was asking, do you recommend for the next session and as we get in, I know we're gonna cast and this is also a logistical point too. Um, Gravity Sketch allows 4 people at a time in the same session, right? Which is what we're planning on operating. So we'll be kind of like working within that constraint between active and demo. But that said, Alana was asking Joey, do you recommend folks getting comfortable or doing anything with Gravity Sketch to prep up for next week?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go over from like the very like basics of just like the tools that are at hand and like some of the workflow stuff. So, um, yeah, I don't know if it's necessary, but it'd probably be good to get just a feel for it and just even like that because that was the first thing I did in it. That's where like unlike other 3D softwares, I think, where you have to like it sometimes it takes a while just to make something, like so many steps just to make something. With Gravity Sketch, you can go in there and just start doodling and like making like just lines in the air and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, maybe just do that. Like just go in there and mess with some tools, get an idea of like where things are. So if it was like if I could do like a one-on-one session with someone, we could go through those really in detail of the tools and like specific questions. But so maybe yeah, maybe that'd be a good idea. Just kind of like run through everything. There's not like a ton of things in there anyway. It's not like Photoshop where you can use it for 30 years and still know 10% of the program. I think it's it's pretty it's pretty simple in that way in terms of like it's powerful but simple in terms of there's not like a million buttons and things like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? Like that noted to when Jeff and I follow up with this. Yeah, if there's any materials you want to share from the presentation for people to go back to, Joy, I could put it in there. And I'll also add in, we've come across a couple like little like simple intro tutorial videos on Gravity Sketch and stuff like that. It's not obligatory homework, but if it's helpful, if people do want to get in there and mess around first, I could throw that in the follow-up email too, if it just makes it a little more fluent to mess around in there. Gotcha.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I forget who mentioned that they were just in VR before this, but there are tutorials built into the program actually too. There's like I think it's like a little graduation cap symbol on the main menu when you're in Gravity Sketch, and it'll like it'll be like a video that's kind of floating in front of you, and it'll walk you through doing some stuff.
Oh, good
Yeah.
to know. Okay. All right. And we're just wrapping the time. I'll give you open the mic back up one more time before we go, but just to call out, go on, put the usual reference to Skillshare up in there. If anybody doesn't have access, he's referring to the website Skillshare, which is paid accounts, but has in-depth tutorials on tons of stuff. And I guess the Illustrator one is good, huh? Nice. And then also he mentioned could just feel AI being able to shoot out blueprints and tech packs. Eesh, watch out, Joey.
Yeah.
Macy, it's also good to do it a little bit in advance so you can get used to it if you're not already used to VR. You mean like moving and not getting dizzy and all of that too?
Yeah, my first time doing Gravity Sketch a couple times, I got pretty dizzy because it's like, I don't know, for me, it was like a little bit disorienting. So then after the annual, I just started doing a little bit occasionally to like almost build up my comfortability with VR. So yeah, if we're gonna be in it for a long time or something for the trainings, it might be good to just get used to it a little bit before.
Good call. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, good call. Yeah, I feel I'm an old man with that. I still get queasy every time. Somebody that was like, we had another designer we were talking to in there in Horizon Worlds, and she was like, "Yeah, we call you porters. You teleport everywhere because you can't use the joystick because it makes you dizzy every time." Porters. All right, we're at time. You got to build up your tolerance. Yep. Yo, any last thoughts or word for the room from the room before we drop? Anybody that didn't, feel free to drop them in here. Follow up with email, of course, if you didn't get your question in. Any last ones before we break? All right, and Joey, any last thoughts to close or things to think about before next week?
No, I think I'm all good. Yeah, definitely get your VR tolerance up before the session, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think anything else to add. But yeah, I appreciate everyone's time and thank you.
Nice. Yeah, everybody go get on the VR roller coaster app before you get on next week. Get you ready. Sea legs up. All right. Well, yeah, 1 minute over. Keep you guys, but thanks everyone again for coming in. That was a deep dive.